lecture was the byproduct of someone asking us to have it, so please respond to those. There's no lecture on March 13th because this auditorium is not available. Our next lecture will be on March 27th on employment agreements with representatives from the firm of Shepherd, Mullen Attorneys. This is something else that I think is really good, teaching you the loopholes when you're looking for a job, what things to look for, and negotiations. So. The next LPCH team called photo shoot is tomorrow afternoon between 1:30 and 3:30 in the LPCH hospital, which is on the third floor right before you enter the main hospital. It is my pleasure to introduce our today's speakers representing clinical research at Stanford, RedCap resources, best practices, and examples. Doctors Andrew Martin and Jennifer Frankovich. Jennifer actually just came from maternity to just be here to talk to you guys. Thank you. Andy, will you tell us a little bit about yourself, or shall I?
Sure. No, I can.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Great. Hi, everybody. Please let me know if you can't hear me, and I'll try to get closer to that microphone. My name's Andy Martin. I'm actually a biochemist by training, but I've always been a computer guy. I worked in pharmaceutical and biotech down in San Diego for a number of years and ran some informatics groups doing drug research. My wife, however, is a physician here at Stanford, and so I came up here to the Bay Area and got involved as a consultant originally with the clinical informatics group, and have since come on full-time and help basically folks like yourself facilitate your ability to do clinical research. And one of the things that I do as well is I maintain and support RedCap, which is one product that we're going to be talking about today. Just for some idea, how many people here have used RedCap? Great, so about half. That sounds good. And then with me is Dr. Frankovich, and she's got a lot of applied experience, but she actually does research. I just help people do research these days. And so she's going to give some great examples of the work that she's done. And so we want it to be ask questions as they come up. I may tell you to wait a little while until I answer it, but please feel free to interrupt. Let's keep this pretty casual. I'm a casual kind of guy. All right, so there are a lot of resources here at Stanford to help people do research. But I still, even after a couple of years, have trouble sometimes keeping them all together and figuring out what's available, and surprised when I learn a few things. One of the ones that you should all be aware of is Spectrum. And in particular in Spectrum, there's a tool called Study Navigator. And how many of you have been to Spectrum's website? Almost everybody. How many people have used Study Navigator to file protocols? Great, great, that's good. So you guys are aware of that one. Here's eProtocol. How many people here have used eProtocol before? Everybody, good. So I try to convince people, especially when they're new and coming in to do research at Stanford, that the IRB doesn't have to be this thing that's dreaded and, oh my gosh, I've got to go see them. I think that with experience, it can actually be a pretty quick process when you consider what's at stake. So I encourage people to get familiar with it and embrace it instead of running from it. And then here's my group. We're the Center for Clinical Informatics, and we're a part of IRT. How many people have been or dealt with us before in the past, clinical informatics? Okay, a few people. So one of the things, if you do Study Navigator and you go through that workflow of all the resources that you need, one of the options, if you're doing data extracts, would send you through to us. But we also manage a number of other services. They're all on our website. And I'm going to give a brief overview of how we facilitate clinical research. And then we're going to move on to RedCap specifically. Since not a lot of people are familiar with us, hopefully this will be new information. So the Center for Clinical Informatics was designed to be the clearinghouse for research requests as it relates to past clinical data. So we've built something called STRIDE, which you may or may not have heard, which means a lot of different things. But for me, it's sort of an amalgamation of all of the clinical data that's available for research here at Stanford into a giant database. It has Epic, it has Cerner, it has historical lab systems, imaging systems. It has all the data that we could reasonably get our hands on and stuff into a single database, a data warehouse, if you will, and make that available for research. there's a blanket IRB that covers our ability to access this information for research and to help other people doing their research with it. So the mission of our group is basically to facilitate research, make people feel good, and we're funded in large part by the CTSA, also funded in part through IRT. We do manage a lot of the secure data resources, and so that's more computer IT stuff. In practice, our consultation group is very small. Right now, there's just about 4 of us, and so we meet on a weekly basis and discuss the consultations that are open and ongoing that we need help on. And then there's a separate group, the Stride Development Group, that works more intimately with the actual Stride data warehouse and building custom applications on top of it. That's led by Dr. Susan Weber, and they're over in Porter Drive. And like I said, we also do the IT, the Secure Data Center. So from our perspective, when you're doing clinical research at Stanford and you want to get access to data, this is one way to look at it. We have this consultation service that sits there in the middle. I'm the pasty redhead there, and that's Gomati. And then we've got, I broke it down into a couple different things that we do. I'm going to briefly, run through these. We've done some cool little one-off apps for research alerting. We do some biospecimen data management. We used to play a bigger role in helping people navigate through privacy and security rules, but now the university has sort of built these into their own separate groups, and so we don't do a whole lot of that. We just refer it off. The main thing we do is we provide people with access to clinical data, and we help people manage that data with tools that are approved for PHI. So as a sort of fun experiment, here's one thing that the Susan Weber's group did. We had a physician that was interested in looking at dog bite victims and trying different treatments. And so originally they found some poor underling to sit there and wait in the ER for someone to come in that happened to be bitten by a dog. That's a lot of waiting and not a very good bang for the buck. So they said, hey, can we listen in on the ADT system, and can we go ahead and page somebody as soon as somebody comes in the front door with a dog bite? It's also been done for snake bites. And so we've set up this real-time alerting system that allows us to listen to the HL7 feeds in the hospital and trigger alerts. But this is very, you can only trigger an alert off one specific piece of information. You can't ask more challenging queries. Like, I want to know if someone had a lab result of X and a diagnosis of Y. That's not really readily available in these feeds. Instead, we have to go to the Stride system and write queries to do that. And we can do that as well, but it takes about a 24-hour delay for us to be able to do that, because we get a snapshot a day later in the case of Epic. And so with those instances, we've done things like someone was doing research on CSF fluid, and so no kid is going to allow their child to be tapped solely for research purposes. However, if they had to be tapped and there's excess CSF that remains, it's good for about a week in the fridge, but the researcher was having trouble figuring out when this was happening and trying to understand, so we were able to figure out who had had the procedure. She could then contact the mother, who's still in the hospital in most cases, get consent, and then get access to the leftover CSF. So that's an example of the second type of alert. We do a lot of biospecimen management. I don't do much of this. I don't know much about it, but if you're interested, you can set up a consultation and we can refer you with the people who do. Like I said, we used to do a lot of privacy and HIPAA compliance stuff. On our website, we've got some interesting links for sort of best practice language. One of the things that we do want to tell people is it relates to doing data extractions. If you're going to come to us and say, hey, I've got this list of MRNs of patients that I've seen, and I want to be able to pull X, Y, and Z from their medical chart, it's really important that you know exactly what X, Y, and Z are, and you make sure that that list is inclusive of everything you're going to need. A lot of times people assume, well, I've got the MRN, I don't need to ask for the date of birth, I can just go look it up in Epic. Well, that is true that you can. It's against the research protocol for you to do so unless the date of birth is explicitly listed on your IRB, and then we cannot deliver you the date of birth unless it's explicitly listed. So we just encourage people to do that, and we have some examples of how you can do that on our website. PHI is the big push. You know, how many people were involved in the encryption debacle of 2013? I was there. I'm actually going to show a few things from it in RedCap. So, you know, this is a huge emphasis. There's just so much pressure being put on the guys in IRT to do what's being done here. I don't know if you saw the letter that came out recently from the General School from Livingston about how the non-medical faculty and staff had a, whoa, don't you try to push that on me moment, which is kind of interesting. But we try to help people do this, and we know quite a bit about it, so if you have questions around this, we're another resource you can come to. So clinical data at Stanford, there's a lot of data. Like I said before, if you think of a giant funnel and you just shove it all into one database, that's what I call Stride, and then we're supposed to be the clearinghouse for getting access to that data. How much data is there? Hey, oh, did you notice I put the new logo on? How many people have seen that? Almost fewer people that have seen our group. That's fantastic. I put that on there, though. I'm ahead of the game. So we got all this data. We put it in a giant funnel. What data is in there? You know, millions and millions and millions of data points. And some of the data goes back further in time, depending on the system it was taken from. You know, the biggest upsurge in data was when we finally just tied directly into Epic. When SCH goes to Epic in another couple years, it's going to be really easy for us to pull that in. It's going to be different than the adult hospitals instance, but there'll be a lot of similarities, and I think we'll have much better data for clinical research going forward. Right now, it's a little cumbersome for us to do queries against Cerner.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the typed notes that residents and doctors would write in-house used to not be a part of the Stride database. Is it now? Or, because I know you guys have been working on that.
Yeah, I believe that most of the notes are included in Stride. Because you can, in the data review tool, you can do text-based queries on all of the notes for terms, and then it highlights those terms.
Yeah. Yeah, so from my experience, it's always been the dictated notes. But we didn't have access to the typed notes, and that they've been working on that for a year, and I just don't know if it's available yet. But
I don't know the answer.
yeah.
We can run that up to Susan. Okay, so to try and make these talks more interesting, I have put together a colorful assortment of graphics that illustrate the research process. It generally begins with someone having a hypothesis and thinking, boy, you know, this seems like an interesting thing you could do. And so we have a tool called the Cohort Discovery Tool that you can come in, you can use to ask questions that answer how many patients, roughly how many patients have, and then you get to fill in the rest of it. And you can write pretty complex queries, and it helps you sort of identify, do we have enough people here? Is the N right? Is the information encoded correctly that I can ask that question? Then generally, there's an IRB step where you get approval to do that research. And then there's a data review tool where you can look at that data, kind of like a digital chart review, where you can go through the patients and you can look at them and you'll say, boy, I was looking for condition X, and here it just says, you know, there's no presence of condition X. I clearly don't want that record in my cohort. How do I filter that out? And sometimes it's an iterative process, and that's what the arrows are meant to indicate. That you kind of go through and then you realize, oh, I've got so many false positives in my cohort, I need to go back and fix that. You take a step back, you go back and you modify your query terms, you do it again, and finally at some point you get a data extraction, which is a bunch of tables dumped into CSV or Excel files in most cases. It's kind of a gap in my opinion. I wish we were able to take that and build it into more of a custom research database for the question at hand, but we just don't have the resources or funding to do that. And so oftentimes if you come to us with complex queries, you're going to get a mess of files, and it's going to be a real challenge to take the next step, which is one of the reasons why I think about 2 or 3 points in here I bulleted, statisticians are your friends. I mean, nobody likes Ray Belize, but he's really helpful when you're doing research, okay? So while he's here, you got to use those guys, and they help you get your research done, and especially when it comes time to organizing that mess of files. And then the last step, data storage and analysis. You've got all this data, and what are you going to do with it? And that's what I'm mainly going to talk about for the rest of the time. So I think I put, this is sort of a caveat slide. When you're doing clinical research at any institution, but at Stanford as well, you just got to really think about where this data came from. Oftentimes you have a question that one would think would be very simple, and if we had better legal guidance on how to store data, and it wasn't all for billing, and we weren't so hyper-paranoid about security, I think we would, but as a result, we have really complex data in our EMR that's oftentimes coded in about as obscure fashion as possible to do clinical research. Then we have a tertiary care hospital that we're pulling most of this data from, so trying to come up with control cohorts to understand the baseline of all the different things can be a real challenge. A lot of the data in the EMR is incomplete or missing. you know those physicians, they don't know what form or what field to put any of the data in, and so they just type it in, and so you never know what you're going to get. And so all these things come and make data queries a real challenge. So when you're trying to come up with a query that describes a cohort of patients, usually you have to really think about it in a number of different angles and say A, B, or C, or D, maybe F, and you come up with all these different Boolean aggregations of potential patients that meet your criteria. And once again, Ray is your friend. All right. So, any questions so far? All right, so the cohort discovery tool, this is the red bar indicating we're talking about it on the bottom. This is the tool that lets you anonymously play around. There's a link to it right here. Hopefully we can make these slides available afterwards. You guys should all be able to go in there. I think the hospital and the School of Medicine has officially coalesced their HIPAA training modules, so you no longer have to, in addition to the hospital HIPAA training, take the School of Medicine's HIPAA training, which is a big time saver. So go ahead and use this tool. It's fun to ask questions and, you know, see if you can guess ICD-9 codes. IRB and privacy review. This is that intermediate step. So you've asked the question, you think Stanford has the data, you now want to go and get approval to go and pull that data and look at it for real. And so every research, at one point or another, you're going to have to go through this step. Some people try to skirt around it at first and wait and wait and wait, and we just encourage people to tackle it early, get it done with, and then make a few amendments down the way if you need to. Cohort data review. This is that tool that helps you to take that cohort and go through the digital chart review. Once again, there's two versions of it. There's a Java version and there's a new HTML5 version that runs pretty slick. Garrick, the main web developer on this, is really a bright guy that's done a great job and is open to feedback. And so if you guys have things that you want to have, it's an iterative process. They're still making it better. Feel free to give feedback back to us. And there are links also on our webpage for how to run that tool. So I've just illustrated one example of how you can get data. This is this generate a hypothesis, do a data extraction, and now you've got it. But there are many other ways. In fact, probably the majority of the ways that you're getting data are not this method. You might be just doing surveys, either on paper or electronic. You could go ahead and be doing a retrospective chart review where you're not even going to go through Stride because the data is just so complicated. You need to look and pull the charts and go ahead and go through them one by one to pull out the pieces of information you want to record. A lot of groups have existing databases, especially the big labs that have been around for a while, have these really horrid FileMaker Pro databases. And they come and they say, hey, come save us. We've got columns here that have all of this patient information, and for some of the rows, the weight is in kilograms, and for some of the rows, it's in pounds, and for some of the rows, it's in text. And so go ahead and help us analyze this data, and that's a real challenge. And so a lot of what we do is we try to help people clean up a lot of these historical systems. And then a lot of people just have Excel files. They kept it real simple. They've got a file on their encrypted laptop. They go ahead and they put their data in. These all work to some extent, but REDCap is a tool that can help make these things work better or replace the parts that don't work. And if you're working with PHI here in the School of Medicine, there's only a handful of places where you're technically allowed to do so. So in terms of hosted services, REDCap and then Qualtrics are the only two places that you are allowed to do research with PHI, really, that we deal with. Coming soon, hopefully in the next month or two, is going to be the secure box installation. It's going to be totally different than your existing box. You're going to have to migrate over. It's going to have a Big Brother component that looks at your computer to make sure it's encrypted before you can even open it up. So it's going to be nice. I think it's going to really transform working with PHI in the hospitals and the school, but it's not quite there yet. Locally, as long as your device is encrypted, you can have these Excel files, access FileMaker Pro, but there are some real downsides of doing that. And then just a reminder that you're never allowed to put PHI on any service that Stanford doesn't have an existing DA agreement with. And sometimes these can really sneak up on you. Some of your backup services, if they're not fully encrypted for your personal devices, if you have PHI on those, that could be a violation. Gmail, it's a real challenge in the School of Medicine when we work with people that are undergrads, because they have Stanford Gmail accounts. And secure email doesn't really work right with the Stanford undergrad accounts. There's a lot of things that basically you have to be very careful because it's easy to inadvertently violate some of those. Yeah?
I just want to make one comment. Is anybody using Qualtrics or having used it? Okay. So because our only options really are RedCap and Qualtrics for these clinical studies, I recently was working with a colleague that decided to use Qualtrics, and one major downside is once you enter the data, you can't, and you confirm that you've entered it, you can't change it. So if you have a medical student or somebody else working on it and they enter the data and they make a mistake and you go back and audit it, there's no way to change it. So it's that's a big downside. So I recommend RedCap. We're actually migrating all the data from Qualtrics into RedCap for that project.
Yeah, the really only use case for Qualtrics is for beautiful surveys.
Yes.
If you're sending out a large survey to people, and it's just really important that you have, you know, total control over the CSS and the formatting of the survey, Qualtrics gives you that. And they also give you a couple of really fancy question types. But if you're doing data storage or data entry, then RedCap is your best solution.
Can RedCap do a survey?
Yes, it can.
Or you can take the survey, enter it, but is there a way to like mail it, email it to someone and have it?
If you have a mobile phone, in 10 minutes, you will be able to figure that out. All right, so here we are, a rapid introduction.
I just had a
Oh.
question. For the secure box, do you happen to know that if you're currently using the MedWikis, if your MedWiki, if it's easy to transfer once the box is available?
I mean, the secure MedWiki, you can download a page, and then you could save it like as a Word file and put it in your Box account, but there's going to be nothing beyond that. I don't think there's a way to like download an entire directory tree in the wiki. Yeah, the secure MedWiki is another place where you can put PHI, but I don't include it because it's not really for research. I mean, it's a place where you want to have a poster of like the active patients in your group, or you want to have like a digital whiteboard that has PHI. The secure MedWiki is okay, but if you're really just grabbing data, you know, it doesn't make sense to upload an Excel file to it, download it, make your changes, and upload it, and hope that no one else downloaded it while you were making changes to your version. Otherwise, you've now got two versions that are out of date. All right, so rapid introduction to RedCap at Stanford. So a little bit about RedCap. It's a secure web-based application. It's a PHP app. It's pretty simple. It's been built by a development team in Vanderbilt that's still under active development, but it's a very small group. There's really only, we call it the Royal We, Rob Taylor. He's pretty much the only developer. He gets help every once in a while. Somebody will come on for 6 months before they get hired away to some other project. But it's amazing what he's done over the years. So this is from 2012. This was an older slide deck I had about how many institutions were using RedCap. And you can see over there, it's really taken on internationally as of late. Around 50,000 users, 36,000 projects. Those are production projects, not just development projects. And then I updated the slide. Oh no, here's the project model. You know, it looks like if you're starting your startup company and you show your revenue in your business plan, the hockey stick right there. But this is actually real data. And so I updated it, and look what's happened just in the past year and a half. It's pretty astounding, the growth rate that it's achieving. And the hockey stick is now just a really long blade, but it's still maintaining that really fast growth, if not, in fact, accelerating further. And then the map of who's using RedCap, it's really a global product now. It's all over the place. There are translations in a number of different languages. The most recent version introduced a whole bunch of date formatting. There's all the poor folks that don't live in the US that don't use month, day, year formatting. We're still stuck with that as the default. So there's been a lot of changes, and the product continues to mature slowly. And we also provide a lot of feedback into Rob and the team about what features to add. So we do have some sway if you guys come in and say, boy, this is really a great idea. Odds are pretty good that within a few months, that might come out in the production version. So Stanford also has a good history with RedCap. So in 2013, we won the RedCap Cup, which meant we had the most user growth of any other institute in the consortium. Unfortunately, when the RedCap trophy arrived, it was badly damaged and broken. And so we had to take it down into LKSC and break out the rivet gun. If you can see that there, you know, retractors. I think we got a ratchet there that Todd's got going to work on the top. And we were able to get it fixed and keep it away from Rodin's, the gates of hell there, we're in good shape. So what is so great about REDCap? Why is it growing like this? Well, it's approved for PHI. It can actually be made Part 21, Part 11 compliant. We aren't that way, but it can be done. And the common thing that people say, because most people come to us with Excel, is you solve the Excel problem. And the main Excel problem is that you cannot really collaboratively work on a document, and you don't have auditing and change history about what's going on with your document. And very few people use validation in Microsoft Excel. They just start typing in the cell. And so as a result, like I mentioned earlier, you see date columns where sometimes it's year, month, day, sometimes it's month, day, sometimes it's year, sometimes it's pink, and you just don't know what that means. And so REDCap helps you avoid those sort of shortcuts to data entry. It's very usable. I think most people, you guys have touched it, you played around with it. There's help and training videos that are tolerable. And there's a large repository of public instruments I'll show you quickly. There's a lot of data validation. You can export and work in a number of analytic software packages. And there are some new advanced features that have come along in the past year and a half that have really added power to REDCap. The biggest ones being custom plugins and the API. So you can now build other programs, examples of which being like custom scoring algorithms for these complex surveys that you might give to determine someone's ranking on some depression score or whatever. It could have a really complex scoring thing that there's no way you could do in REDCap. But you can write a program that sucks the data out, runs it through your custom black box, generates your summary numbers, and pushes that data back into REDCap. We've done that in a number of instances. And it's been really powerful and saved a lot of time. Then the plugins, I'll give a few examples. Then there's a number of other features and I think I've got examples of some of those coming up. So how do you get started for the 20 or 30% of you that haven't already, or for those that need a little more help? You just log in. It's almost Friday. I say the training video works best Friday evening with a glass of wine or beer. And you click on that 78-minute video, and Vita will explain how REDCap works. It's a good start. There's a number of other shorter videos that are targeted to different features. And then after that, you've got the help and FAQ, which that's the official one. And then we have our own FAQ, which is much worse. It's much more outdated, but you can go there because there are a few things. And I'll send a very condescending email to you if you ask me a question that's on the FAQ. And then step 3 is you can email us, which is emailing me. And I'm happy to answer your questions and meet with you and help you get started. So I think the best way to do things is to learn by doing them. There's way too much in here to give a comprehensive talk about it, so we're just going to do something real simple. And I have a study idea in mind that I've been thinking a lot about. I think it's going to be a big publication. And so I think that there might be a correlation between someone's BMI and how much they crave nachos. Now, I don't know whether it's an inverse correlation or not, but I do believe that there is a correlation there. And then I'm going to make a second supposition, which is that the male machismo effect is going to say when it comes to do you like jalapenos on your nachos, the guys are going to like, yeah, I can take it, and they're going to step up and check that box. So those are my 2 hypotheses, and I'm now going to go ahead and see if I can't build a REDCap project that's going to help me answer these questions. So let's see if this is going to work. And you guys see what I'm doing? It looks like it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm logged into REDCap. I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to call this the BMI Nacho Proj. Boy, that's really hard to read, isn't it? Let me see. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say this is for fun and create a project. All right. And when you first make a project, you'll see that there are some tabs across the top with some of the big sections. There's a lot of stuff on the left. These are all little applications or features within your project that you can do. But when you're starting, you go to the Project Setup tab, and there's a link to it here, and there's also a link on the left side. And you walk down, and you sort of go through these boxes, and you can go ahead and click I'm done and it turns green. And that sort of, the idea is to sort of visually walk you through the steps to configure your project. I'm going to start real simple.